Please be seated. So today we hear that parable, the Good Samaritan. And we hear a lawyer asking, "Who is my neighbor?" And we also hear Jesus saying, without telling him outrightly, that he needs to treat others as neighbors. I feel the real question is, do we speak and act from the heart or from the head? The lawyer understands that we must love our neighbor, but he wants to determine the definition of neighbor logically and rationally. But Jesus does not answer in that way. Jesus guides us in our heart to answer the question, and that's when he uses that parable. Those who speak on the side of love, those travelers, pass on. They leave the injured. They look away. And after all, good sense does play a part. There could be very great danger on that road. What if the man was faking an injury and going to rob them? What if they're in a hurry, have an appointment, need to get somewhere, critical, and have no time to help? And who is this man on the other side of the road? He could be Jewish or a Samaritan, and we know Samaritans were not friends with the Jewish people. He could be seen as an enemy. Or perhaps the Jewish priest and Levite assume that he was not of their belief. Perhaps the victim is not of their culture, belief system. Maybe they don't follow the same faith. Maybe they don't believe in the same God, the one God. There's so many variables when you look at the situation. There are many variables that a logical person, before they act, would reflect upon. That is logic. However, Jesus is not logical. He brings a different perspective. He says a Samaritan traveler came upon the suffering man, and he was moved. He was not thinking with his head on what would be best. He was thinking with his heart. He was compelled. He was moved. He shares whatever he has. He shares his abundance with the injured man, even going to an extreme to take care of him. He bandages his wounds, brings him to shelter. He pays for the man's care and personally cared for him. And he tells the innkeeper, "On my way back, I will make sure that my stranger friend, neighbor, is okay, and you are compensated for whatever needs to be paid." That Samaritan lived from the heart, with compassion, acceptance. He acted without judgment and not really analyzing the situation, but knew that someone was hurt. Now, the whole idea of neighbor brings up a children's program from years ago. Maybe some of you may remember. Anybody remember Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood? Me too. Wasn't it sweet? Now, for those who don't know Mr. Rogers, he was a minister, and he was also teaching children how to be neighbors, how to take care of one another, how to recognize when someone needed help, needed comfort. And he really empowered children. And a friend of mine once said, "You know, I'm thankful for Mr. Rogers because there are some children that don't get a kind word." And there he is. He had a very gentle way and a gentle voice. So he teaches children and adults to be neighbors to one another. And it's an invitation for you to be his neighbor. And no, I won't sing the song, don't worry. But you can join it. You can start singing if you wish. He sings a song about, won't you be my neighbor? I always wanted to have a neighbor just like you. It was so sweet. And his message was so simple. Open your heart to another, just like he did. Give solace and compassion in action, not just words, to each person, some with whom you might have a grievance, some are indifferent. And we can also turn a stranger into a neighbor and a neighbor into a friend. We can fully live the thought to love one another and ourselves. And we act not because of what even we should do. We are compelled to act. We are a people of the way and servants of Christ. And by acting as a neighbor, again, we can become neighbors to strangers, and strangers can become friends. But in our world, that is an ideal, right? And we are in the face of many challenges and difficulties, and there are no easy solutions, although it kind of sounds like it's an easy one, but it isn't. There's so many variables, there's so many perceptions. Easy judgment cannot exist. We'd like a simple solution, but we live in very complicated times. And we're invited to see some of those variables, all those differences, all those, what do I do? And each time we see all these different diverse perspectives, we realize we can't judge. It's too much for us to comprehend and to process. So we're invited to set aside difference and see the suffering as part of God's children. And we're invited to act with compassion, even with those to whom we vehemently disagree. We're invited to see the hardship of another and bring comfort. We're challenged to see Jesus in every person, seeing the spark of our God, our Creator, in every person. After all, we're all created together. The community of Christians living in a world where we recognize everyone as brother and sister, that's the gift of being servants of Christ. And I feel blessed to be able to witness these beautiful acts of kindness and compassion every day. In both where I work at the Canterbury's Chaplain and here, among you, part of this community. I'm blessed to be part of both communities. And a couple of days ago, I witnessed a resident who was really struggling. I'll call him Bob. He was standing at the front desk speaking to us. His hat was pulled down very low. His shoulders were hunched. You could just see burdens upon his back. He was wearing his mask, and he said he was feeling very lonely, that he didn't feel he had anyone to talk to at the moment, and he was just going to go to his room and be by himself. Well, another resident, and I'll call her Mary, noticed this as she was passing by, and she stopped, stood aside, and very quietly listened to what he said. And she smiled, and she said, "I don't think I know you. My name's Mary, what's yours?" He said, "I'm Bob," and even his voice was just weak and run down. And she said, "I don't know you." And she engaged him in conversation and then said, "You know, I'm going to dinner. Come have dinner with me. We can talk. And he said, no, I have a bag of groceries and I got to put them away. And so the receptionist and I immediately intervened and said, we'll take them for you. Go, go. And all of a sudden he said, yes, I think I will. And he stood up straight. He pushed his hat back on his head. He kept his mask on. But they just started talking and he became animated and full of life. That's living in community. That's living as a good Samaritan, treating the other person as neighbor. And I like to mention, I know this resident well, Mary. She's an atheist. She does it because it's the right thing to do, to take care of one another. God works his love through every single person. Believers, non-believers, different people, different cultures, different diversity everywhere. God is still working wonders with every person. I give and respect so many in that community. And Jesus' invitation to honor one another, even one who has completed their journey, to remember them, it's a gift of abundant grace. And I have the great blessing of being at St. Francis. I get a double blessing because I witness every time I'm here a kindness to one another. I got to call somebody. I got to call this person. They're not doing too well. Oh, I have a card for you. You had a birthday. And welcoming new people. Someone walks in, it's hello, welcome. I'm glad you're here. Come, sit, have a cup of coffee. You know, Episcopalians have to drink coffee, right? And that's what we do. We embrace, the stranger becomes the neighbor, and the neighbor becomes the friend. And we are all here in community. It's wonderful. That's what life is all about. Inviting someone to be your neighbor, like Mr. Rogers does. And we witnessed that if you ever watched him. And also to be a neighbor to someone else. It all comes around, doesn't it? So I am grateful. I'm grateful to be here. I'm grateful for what we all do in ministry. I'm grateful for every person I meet because I learn something from each one. I'm grateful to have new friends and long-term friends, neighbors with whom I can walk and I can find support and comfort, and that's what we all do for one another. So in the gospel, Jesus is asking the lawyer, which of these three do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of robbers? And he said, the one who showed him mercy. Jesus says, go and do likewise. Be the neighbor and believe and act from the heart. And invite the other to become your neighbor. So we're invited to be a neighbor, showing mercy, and we're also inviting another person to be our neighbor. So we can be just like Mr. Rogers, going and asking, won't you be my neighbor? Love God, love others, love ourselves.